Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another in our foil series of Fireside chats. I'm delighted to have with me today Samrah Jaffrey, a solicitor at DWF, who also sits on our diversity and inclusion working group. Samrah has a very interesting life story that my good friend Mark and I are going to gradually tease out of her over the next 25 to 30 minutes or so. And I think you'll see as the story unfolds that it's an example of how attitudes have shifted in the legal profession and society generally over the past sort of 30 years or so. But you draw your own conclusions. I'm going to start off by asking Samrah the first question. So, Samrah, you talked when we were doing our sort of prep for this about your grandfather and his interest in the law. Perhaps you could tell us a bit about your early life and particularly the influence that he had on you, taking you up to, say, I don't know, university age or something like that.
Sure. Thank you, Lawrence and Mark, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So my father came to the UK in 1961. Myself and my three siblings were all born here. And when my father was only 6 months old, my grandfather passed away. So all I'd heard was stories. But I think I was probably early teens when I heard that he was actually quite a strong and well-known advocate in India. So pre-partition, my dad was about 6 when he came over from India to Pakistan, with us being Muslims. So I'd heard about my grandfather, being an advocate in India, and it seemed very glamorous and very interesting. And to a 12, 13-year-old, I was like, oh, okay, not thought about that. And I do find in my mature years that it's a very different atmosphere. So in school I didn't really know any lawyers. I hadn't talked to anybody who knew any. So that, as I said, it felt very glamorous to me. So I decided that I would follow in his footsteps and become a lawyer. So when everyone's going to their careers, teachers, and saying, I don't know, do a quiz and whatever, I was like, yes, of course I want to be a lawyer. So that was quite convenient. Of course, I had no idea what it would involve, but just thought it sounded really great. And I've never looked back. So that was quite nice to have that connection. I particularly felt, because my father hadn't seen his own father, that would be a nice sort of thing to follow in his footsteps. And found a university course. My mother was a lecturer. She was a pioneer in her own time, because she was the first woman in our family, our extended family, to, with her father's permission, take off the veil and go to university. And
Okay.
she the family was scandalized. How can she go out without a burqa? But my maternal grandfather was all for education, and so she was a lecturer. So the expectation was always that we would go to university and do something. So I found, actually, when SOAS wasn't as well known and popular as it is now, a course that was law with Urdu. So that allowed me to qualify with my sort of 9 units that would take me into law school and study Urdu literature. So we're all bilingual, and that was just sort of a bit of fun. So that is,
Okay.
a brief.
So that's fantastic. Very interesting background to do that, and certainly careers departments welcome the student who comes in and says, I know what I want to do. That's that box ticked. So I'm sure you were a great boon to them in those days. But tell me a bit more about how your career in law developed.
That was actually really interesting. It's one of those stories that you hear and you're like, okay. So I was lucky enough to get what were then articles in Lovell White Durrant, as it was then known. It's Hogan Lovells now. And I went through my 4 seats, and I was offered a job at the end of it in litigation, and of course said, I'm not a litigator, I want to be a company commercial person, so I'm going to wait for that job. So there were no jobs there in that department, and I turned my back on litigation. And of course, 31 years later, what am I? I'm a litigator. So I then fell into, while I was waiting for company commercial, I fell into the Treasury Solicitors Department, as it then was, as a locum, and I was doing defendant personal injury work for the Home Office Prison Service. And so I was running up and down the country dealing with inquests and, claims from officers, staff, visitors, prisoners, all that kind of stuff. And all the while in the arrogance and fullness of youth, thinking, of course, I'm going to go back and, get my company commercial job. And by the time I knew it, I was 2 years PQE in personal injury defendant law. And the rest, as they say, is history. And then the next job, after that, I went to Shoesmiths, where the agency had sent me. And of course, I told them that I was defendant. And I turned up to the partner who had had someone go off long-term sick leave. And he took me into a room, and it was, sort of top to toe full of files, and said, I understand that you're 2 years PQE, so you can probably just crack on. You're okay with this. We obviously do claimant work. It's this, and it's union and everything. And I said, you do know I'm a defendant lawyer, don't you? And he said, the agency didn't tell me. And I was like, the agency didn't tell me either. So again, fell into claimant. So long and short of it is, I've done 20 years claimant, and I'm now about 10, 11 years defendant PI. So, and when I qualified, I certainly didn't intend to become a personal injury lawyer, but here I am. So, yeah.
I'm not trying to kind of pigeonhole or define you, Samarah, but I mean, you talked about breaking through glass ceilings and some of the barriers you overcome. But as an Asian woman coming into legal services, again, when we were chatting before, you said you've never directly experienced racism at you, but you've certainly witnessed it.
Yeah.
At others. Do you want to share some of those experiences?
Yeah, I think, as I said, it's really strange speaking about it now, because it's being dealt with really well in the world. Well, it was until certain international events, but, and so we take so much for granted now. But, 30 years ago, when I started out, I've never really experienced, I've been very lucky, never really experienced racism, but there's always been an undertone, and that I did have. So again, being in a city firm, it didn't click at the time, but I was, I would meet or I'd go and deliver documents to a partner or whatever, who would be inevitably a gentleman in his sort of late 60s or something. I don't want to pigeonhole or stereotype. And they would just assume that I was a secretary, or, sort of not even a paralegal. It wasn't even a thing at that point, but somebody who's just, here to make a cup of coffee or whatever. And then look askance when, my sort of boss or partner would walk in and say, right, this is my trainee, and, let's get on with it. And it was at that point, it was just a look, and I was like, well, why does he look so surprised? And then the penny dropped, and I thought, oh, okay, didn't really expect it, and there were some people who clearly hadn't even actually met an Asian woman before. So it was, it was a very different world then. And I'm very lucky, because I don't mean to diminish that at all. And obviously people suffer horrendous episodes. I was very lucky not to, but even in the nice sort of world that I lived in, and I was born in the UK, so and I embrace, very different elements within my personality. I am Pakistani by heritage, by ethnicity. I am British by birth, so this is my country and who I'm loyal to, and I'm Muslim as, my religion. But all three of them are a massive part of who I am, and I don't see them as separate. And it's only when you're reminded in the way that somebody looks at you that actually, okay, I'm different. So if you're British and I'm British, then I forget that actually somebody might see, or might question my loyalty or where I come from. I've been really lucky to not experience that expressly, but sometimes it's a question
What
in someone's eyes.
what sort of era is that you were talking about when you went into that chap's office and he assumed you were there to
That was early
do waitressing
90s.
or something?
Early
Early
90s.
90s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's not like the
Well, that's
1800s or something, but yeah, early 90s.
yeah, crikey, it's still 30 years ago, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And where how was the rest of your life panning out at this point? So you've sort of
So
made some good steps in the law career.
yeah,
What's the
it was
rest of your life like at that
it was
time?
actually, again, until you explain it to somebody else, you don't realize that there's anything sort of strange about your life. But personally, so work was going well, I'd found my niche, I was enjoying work, but the expectation, and certainly 30 years ago, personally, was that, okay, I'd qualified, and that set me a little bit apart, or set our family a little bit apart. But of course, I was going to get married, and that was the expectation. And I didn't particularly want to at all. So I thought I was very smart and clearly wasn't. So I just kept putting it off, thinking the older I get, the less chance I have of being harassed about getting married, because I'm just going to age myself out of the marriage market. And ironically, I always say there's my plan and then there's God's plan. So I got married when I was 29. And again, it's a very different era now, because, sort of, and I very much felt this when I had my child and became a single parent, that it had to be a choice, whereas it's not a choice now. You have your work and you have your family, and there's a balance. And as a woman, it's not like, well, one or the other, you either raise children or you have work. But at that point, it was, and especially in the Asian culture, my parents were very progressive, but they lived in a certain society. And, a lot of people disapproved and said, well, you're educating her out of out of a husband or whatever. So I'd, I was facing that at home. And I thought I'd swerved it, but I didn't. And I got married at 29. And then it was just, it was very strange, because it was a very traditional role at home, and a very normal professional one at work. I think the most poignant story I can tell you is that when I a couple of months before I was getting married, and I took great pride in wearing my pinstripe suits to court, and all the rest of it. And a couple of months before I was getting married, my mum said to me, well, you need to get your nose pierced. And I was like, why? And she said, well, because we have, the traditional, it's a massive nose ring, which is very, pretty. And now everyone gets a stud. You don't have to get your nose pierced. And I was like, but I can't. I go to court. And you had to have, if you got your nose pierced, to keep it open, you had to have a gold stud. And I was like, I'm not going to go to court with a gold stud in my nose. I'm just not. And I was so upset. And she said, look, it's just got to be done. That's what your future mother-in-law wants. And so it was a whole different thing. And of course I did it, because I was a good girl and I listened, and turned up in my suits and my nose stud to wherever I needed to go. So that was what was going on at home. And so again, looking back at the grand old age I am now, I see the discord and the dichotomy, as it were. But I think that that's probably hopefully gone over time, and it's a very different world for young ladies now.
Clearly, bringing up a child as a single parent is a challenge. So maybe you want to share some of the challenges and how that defined you kind of coming forward. But as you now have that point of reflection back, do you think the right support has emerged in the intervening time? Obviously, you can't change what happened when you were in that circumstance, but as you look back, what would you wished had been there? Are those things being done? And actually, as a business society, do you think we properly address them now, or are we just kind of veneering over the top of it? Just to see is there some depth changes that have come on?
Yeah, I think there will always be challenges, and I can only speak for myself. And it's my observation, in summary, that I think we're in a much better place now. Um, and it's a bit shocking to me now, what is in place now compared to what I didn't have then, which, so I would be in the office in central London at 7 a.m. so that I could leave at 2, so that I could pick him up, my son up at 3:30. And now, HR was nowhere to be seen. The attitude was very much like, the partners were, we're doing you a favor. At 5 to 2, there was no consideration of, the stress of a mother running out saying, I've got to be there. And I think one of the biggest challenges, which maybe to a lesser degree or maybe not, that women face, or even men in this situation, is that you never feel enough. At work, I felt that I was not enough as a mother. And when I was with my child, I felt that I was not enough and I wasn't doing enough at work. And ironically, we actually try to work 4 times as hard when we're at work because you try to compensate. And I think what wasn't in place there was certainly the understanding. It was as if I was being done a favor, even though I would complete my hours and, as far as I could, because I was working 5 days a week, complete the work. So it wasn't as if the business was suffering, but there was no consideration of, okay, what can we do to support you, or how can we make this easier? It was very much you're on your own, you sort that out, don't let your work suffer. And okay, we're a really nice firm for actually letting you walk out the door at 2. And at 5 to 2, inevitably somebody would come up with a question, or just a bit. And the stress of that train journey was horrendous. So, which I don't think, I can't speak for everyone, but certainly what I observe now, that would not be acceptable. If I, was in that position now and I went to my employers, my current employers are brilliant. And ironically, I went from being a single parent to, with the intervening period, then to being a carer for 7 years. And even in the last 10 years, attitudes have changed. So I was a carer before I realized that I was a carer. My son became a carer with me and we dealt with it. And it was only when the GP said, do you want to register as a carer? And I said, well, oh, okay. I didn't realize I was one. And they were like, well, this is what you're doing. Both of my parents had very serious health issues. I was holding down a job full time. My son was going off to university. And, I now again see, inevitably in the work situation, there's a carers network that pops up, and there's this meeting and there's that meeting and there's all the rest of it, which 10 years ago just kind of wasn't really there. So I feel that, we have come far, but what really makes a difference is family. I had a very, very supportive family. I think I hasten to say, and I don't mean to sound rude when I say this, but I think education is a big thing. And we take it for granted, but it makes a big, big difference. And certainly as an Asian woman, there was stigma, very much so, when I was going through what I was going through, but my parents didn't care. They said, well, you've done nothing wrong. You're doing the best that you can. And actually, the thing that I was afraid of, which was my son turning out from a broken home and, getting into all sorts, is the complete opposite of where he is. He's an economist for Moody's in the US team, doing really, really well. He got first in economics. He went to the LSE and did management and economics, and lives and works in Boston with his beautiful wife, and his firm, which is a global firm, love him. So, I would do it all again 1,000,000 times.
I think that's fantastic. And obviously your pride at his achievements comes across loud and clear. That's absolutely brilliant. I think that's a really fantastic story of how important the support of your family is.
Yeah.
Both to you as you experienced it, but obviously the way you supported your son has really helped him to develop. So I think that's fantastic. Do you want to sum up, Mark? I think we're probably at a point where we should be thinking about wrapping up.
No, exactly that. No, sorry, I've just taken it back because it's such a lovely story. Sorry, in any kind of patronising sort of way, but as you're very modest in the way you speak about it, and as you were saying, we all suffer from bits of imposter syndrome. as we look back. But we do what we do on a daily basis, and we always put that one step forward, one in front of the other. It's only when you kind of get that reflection point back.
Yeah.
It's just lovely that you saw yourself through your challenges. Great that you feel that it's getting to a better place now. I think perhaps, and I can't speak on behalf of your current employer, but they sound like they're a very supportive company and they look out for you and they treat you well as well. So maybe a bit of recognition for the work that they do. And I, from my point of view, and I think, this is certainly when Lawrence and I were talking about doing this fireside chat, it was just an example just to bring the kind of humanity, the real humanity of what we are, what we do, and that can sometimes get lost. So no, I genuinely, I think it's a lovely story, because I know you quite well. I know what a lovely person you really are as well. So it's honest and it's an authentic story.
That's very kind, Mark. I think, you just do what you do. And if I had to crystallize it and sum it up, I may be naive, but I don't know many people who can genuinely say that my 25-year-old is my best friend and I'm his best friend. And, we live in different countries and he's in touch with me all the time and he worships the ground that I walk on. And when you start out as a parent, there's no manual. You don't know whether you're doing it right. You don't know what they'll turn out like. And all around I hear so-and-so doesn't speak to so-and-so, and then you're not with them, or your kids don't care, whatever. As I said, I couldn't be more blessed. So I'm glad that, you enjoyed hearing my story. I didn't think it was a story, but yeah, I guess it is. And it's a journey. And I feel very grateful. And I think if I could just say one thing to, women who worry out there, or men, that I wish somebody had said to me, it'll be okay. It really will. Just keep going. It'll be okay. And that's what my family gave me. And, that's why I'm sort of sitting here beaming at you today.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Samrah. It's fantastically uplifting as a story, and as we've said, testimony to the power of family and love. So thank you very much for sharing that. Thank you, Mark, also for being part of the conversation, part of the discussion. If you want to see any more of Foyle's Fireside Chats, they're all on our website. And if you want to follow us on LinkedIn, you'll see a QR code at the end of this that will show you where to find us. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.